Have you ever felt like your pain didn't matter? Like you were just background noise in your own family? That's exactly how I felt the day my parents told me they couldn't afford my treatment, but then bought my sister a brand new iPhone without hesitation. "We're sorry. We just don't have the money right now," my dad said. But 2 days later, I watched him swipe his card for $1, $249.99. And when I collapsed at school, burning with fever, my joints barely able to hold me up, that's when everything they'd been ignoring hit them like a freight train. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 17 years old, and this is my story. Before I take you through what happened, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if stories about real resilience matter to you. Now, let me take you back to when it all began. When I was 14, I thought the worst thing that could happen was missing the school dance because of a cold. That was before the diagnosis. They called it a rare autoimmune disorder, something about my immune system turning against my own body. At first, I didn't understand what that meant, but I understood the pain. It started in my knees, then moved to my wrists, then my fingers. Joints that used to let me move freely now screamed every time I picked up a pen or climbed the stairs. Some days, I couldn't even brush my own hair. We lived in a quiet suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. 2 stories, white shutters, a porch swing out front. From the outside, our house looked like any other. Inside, it felt like I was disappearing. Slowly, quietly, invisibly. My mom, Susan, taught second grade at the local elementary school. My dad, David, worked in accounting. We weren't rich, but we were stable, comfortable. My younger sister, Emma, was the family's golden girl. At 15, she was everything I used to be before the illness took over. Bright, athletic, charismatic. She captained the debate team, played violin like a professional, and somehow managed to keep a perfect GPA. My parents lit up when she entered the room. I used to see that light in their eyes when they looked at me. Now, it flickered only for her. Emma got another A on her chemistry test. Mom said one night, reaching across the dinner table to squeeze her hand. "That's my girl." Dad beamed. "Harvard won't know what hit them." I said nothing. I couldn't. My hands were too stiff to hold a fork properly that night, and the mashed potatoes on my plate blurred in and out of focus. When I asked to be excused, Mom nodded absently, already turning back to hear more about Emma's day. That's how it always was. I wasn't angry, not really. Just tired. Tired of being the family's quiet crisis. Tired of how pain has become part of my routine. Tired of watching my parents pretend everything was fine as long as Emma was shining. They never said it out loud, but I could feel it. The shift. In the beginning, they fought for me. They researched late into the night, took me to every specialist within 100 miles, and adjusted their diets to match my anti-inflammatory meals. Dad used to carry me downstairs on the bad days. Mom used to rub my wrist gently before bed. But over time, the urgency faded. The attention moved elsewhere. And I stayed where I was, hurting. "You have to understand," Dad said once, when I asked why I had to miss another school event for a doctor's appointment. "Your condition affects all of us. We've all had to make sacrifices." I nodded. I didn't say what I wanted to ask. What exactly has Emma sacrificed? Because from where I sat, aching, exhausted, and invisible, the answer felt like nothing. That was the first time I truly realized something had changed. Not just in my body, but in my place within the family. The thing about hope is, it doesn't take much. Sometimes, all it takes is a sentence, a new possibility, a doctor's voice, steady but kind. At my last checkup, Dr. Haynes leaned forward with a brochure in his hand. He didn't smile. but his eyes held something I hadn't seen in a long time: possibility. This biologic therapy has shown real promise in patients like Natalie, he said, glancing at both my parents before looking back at me. It won't cure her condition, but it could dramatically reduce the inflammation, slow the progression, maybe even allow her to regain some function. I felt my breath catch. My mom sat up straighter. My dad nodded, slowly. It was the first time in months that someone had offered something more than maintenance or management. This wasn't about enduring anymore. It was about getting better. But then came the price tag. Our insurance covers part of the infusions, Dr. Haynes explained. But your out-of-pocket cost would come to around $200. The silence that followed was heavy. I looked at my parents. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom folded the brochure and placed it in her lap like it was made of glass. "We'll talk it over," Dad said. His voice didn't carry the certainty I needed to hear. On the ride home, no one spoke. I sat in the back seat, staring at the brochure in my hands. I imagined a life where getting out of bed didn't feel like climbing a mountain. I could go back to school full-time, join a club, eat dinner without silently counting the seconds until I could lie down. I wanted that life. I needed that life. But the next morning, as I walked past the living room, I heard a different conversation. "Everyone has the new iPhone 13 Pro," Emma said, her voice light, persuasive. "Mine's 3 years old. The camera is so bad. How am I supposed to document our debate team's trip to nationals with this fossil?" I paused in the hallway. Mom sighed. "Emma, that model's expensive, over $200. But my birthday's next week," Emma replied sweetly. "And I've kept a 4.0 all semester. Jessica's parents got her one, and they work at a grocery store." I waited for the answer I was sure was coming, the gentle, reasonable no. Instead, I heard my dad laugh. "Well," he said, "when you put it like that, what do you think, Susan?" Mom didn't hesitate. "She has been working hard. Maybe we can swing it." I must have made a sound, some small gasp or step, because they all turned to see me in the doorway. Emma beamed. "Guess what Mom and Dad are getting me the new iPhone for my birthday. Isn't that awesome?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's great, Emma." But something inside me cracked. 2 days later, I found myself sitting on a bench at the Apple store. I didn't want to be there, but Mom insisted it'd be good for me to get out of the house. Emma flitted from one display to another, comparing colors and camera specs. My parents followed behind, laughing and nodding. A sales associate named Brandon guided them through the purchase like it was the happiest moment of their week. "That comes to $1,249.99, he said cheerfully. Dad handed over his card without hesitation. I stared at the transaction. Numb. That money, more than half of what we needed for the treatment, was gone in seconds. Spent on a phone that would be outdated in a year. Spent without a pause, without a single conversation. On the ride home, Emma played with her new phone in the back seat beside me. She snapped selfies, tested filters, showed off features. My parents smiled and asked questions like it were all a celebration. "This camera is insane," Emma said, showing Mom a photo of her shoes. "Look at the detail," Mom smiled. "That's amazing. Honey, make sure to get great shots at your tournament." I stared out the window, counting telephone poles until we pulled into the driveway. Each one felt like a heartbeat I couldn't slow down. That night, I waited until after dinner. My parents were in the kitchen, cleaning up, a quiet, practiced routine. I stepped in. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. "Can we talk about my treatment?" They exchanged a look. "Not the good kind. We're still looking into it." Dad said, "Medical stuff is complicated, but you just spent over $1,200 on Emma's phone." I said. The words spilled out before I could soften them. Mom's expression changed. That was different. That was a birthday gift. How is it different? I asked, eyes burning. That treatment could change my life. Dad turned, weary. We've already spent so much on treatments, ones that didn't work. So you're giving up on me. Of course not, Mom said. Her voice clipped. But we don't have any money for you right now. I stood there, frozen. My knees ached. My chest felt hollow. I see, I said softly. Emma gets a new phone, and I get pain. Because I'm not worth it anymore. That's not fair, Dad said. No, I agreed. It's not. And I walked away, the sound of my footsteps echoing louder than their silence. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The numbers kept replaying in my head: $2,200 for the treatment, $1,249 for a phone. One number was followed by silence, excuses, and avoidance. The other, by smiles, celebration, and a swipe of a credit card. I kept waiting for something to shift, for one of them to knock on my door and say they'd thought about it again, that they'd made a mistake, that I mattered just as much. But the hallway stayed quiet, just the sound of the dishwasher humming below, and the dull throb in my joints. By morning, the fog in my body had settled into something sharper. Anger, maybe, or grief, I wasn't sure. But I knew I couldn't hold it in any longer. After breakfast, I followed my parents into the living room. Dad was reading the paper. Mom scrolled through emails on her tablet. I stood there for a moment before speaking, hoping they'd look up. They didn't. So that's it, I asked quietly. You've really decided not to help me with the treatment? Dad looked up first, startled. Natalie, we told you. We're still figuring things out. It's been days, I replied. And you've figured out everything else just fine, like how to buy a phone in under 10 minutes. He set the paper down. That's not fair. No, I said, voice steady. What's not fair is watching you both spend over $1,000 like it's nothing, while telling me I'm too expensive to help. Mom exhaled, sharp and defensive. Natalie, you know that's not what we said. Not with those exact words. I answered, but the message was clear. You didn't hesitate for her. You hesitated for me. Dad's voice dropped low. You have no idea how much we've already spent over the years. Hospital visits, specialists, therapies that led nowhere. It adds up. I felt my stomach drop. There it was, the price tag I'd become. So now I'm an expense, I whispered, a failed investment. Mom stood, setting the tablet aside. That's not what we mean, isn't it? I asked. Because that's how it feels. Like I'm this drain on the family, something to be managed, not helped. Dad looked away. Mom folded her arms. I didn't choose to be sick, I added, barely above a whisper. But you chose how to respond. And lately, you've chosen her. The room fell into a silence that felt like it might never end. I turned and walked upstairs, one aching step at a time. In my room, I closed the door quietly, then reached for my phone with trembling hands. I didn't want comfort. I needed clarity. I needed someone who saw me, not as a problem, but as a person. I called Zoe. She answered on the first ring. Hey, you okay? She asked, instantly sensing something was off. They bought her the phone, I said flatly. Zoe didn't speak for a second. Seriously, over $1,000, I said. And when I asked again about my treatment, they said they didn't have money for me. Nat. Her voice dropped, low and angry. That's not okay. I swallowed hard. It's like I've turned into this charity case. Like they're just tired of me. You're not a burden, she said firmly. You're their daughter. You deserve better. I feel like I don't belong here anymore. I admitted. Like I'm some shadow in the background they forgot how to look at. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want me to come over?" "No." I said quickly. I just, I needed to hear a voice that doesn't make me feel small. She didn't say anything right away. "Then I'm here. Always." "Okay. You're not alone in this." Her words were simple, but in that moment they held me up. I didn't have answers. I didn't have a treatment plan, but I had Zoe. And somehow, that was enough to stop the spiral, at least for tonight. The days after that conversation blurred together, not because they passed quickly, far from it, but because everything started to hurt. My joints swelled more than usual. Mornings turned into battles just to sit up. Getting dressed was like putting on armor with broken hands. I began skipping dinner, using homework as an excuse, though no one really asked why. The pain was constant now, not just in my body, but in the way people moved around me like I was furniture. Something in the way, but easy to ignore. I tried not to spiral. I thought maybe I could still fix this myself. If I could make some money, just a little, maybe I could pay for part of the treatment. Or at least show my parents I was trying. That I wasn't just waiting for help. That I wasn't the burden they saw when they looked at me. So I applied for jobs. The local library said they needed someone who could lift boxes of donated books. The coffee shop downtown required long shifts on your feet. Even the bookstore, the one place I felt at home, told me kindly they needed someone reliable, someone who wouldn't miss work for flare-ups. I smiled, thanked them all, and walked out slowly, careful not to limp too obviously. By the end of the week, I had a collection of polite rejections and a renewed sense of uselessness. At school, things weren't any better. I couldn't keep up with notes in calculus. My fingers cramped too quickly. In English, my favorite subject, I turned in an essay so rushed and unfocused that Mr. Bennett pulled me aside. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently, tapping the corner of my paper. A red C+ circled at the top. "This doesn't feel like you." I wanted to explain. I wanted to say I hadn't slept, that I was in pain, that I was scared. But all I could say was, "I've just been really tired lately." He nodded, not pushing, but his eyes lingered with concern. It was the same look Ms. Ramirez, the school counselor, gave me when she called me into her office later that week. "I've noticed your grades slipping," she said, "and your teachers say you've seemed distant." "I've just been having a rough time with my condition." I told her. "It's flaring up more than usual." She asked if anything had changed, if I'd started a new treatment, or if my doctor had adjusted my care plan. "We're exploring options," I said quietly. It felt like a lie, even though, technically, it wasn't. We weren't exploring anything. We were stalled. Stuck. I was stuck. That night, we had spaghetti for dinner, normally one of my favorites, but I couldn't twirl the noodles with my aching fingers. I pushed the food around my plate, listening to Emma recount her latest debate practice. "My coach thinks I have a real shot at being team captain next year," she said, scrolling through her phone. "He said my rebuttal yesterday was practically college level." "That's wonderful, honey." Mom beamed. "Isn't that great?" "David," she added, turning to my dad. "Absolutely," he said, without even glancing in my direction. "You're making us proud." Emma, I wondered if I disappeared right then, vanished from the table, from the house. Would they even notice? Probably not. As long as Emma kept talking, the air would stay full. That night, I lay awake again, the pain in my knees pulsing with every heartbeat, out of desperation. I pulled out my laptop and began reading more about my condition. The deeper I went, the more terrified I became. Articles outlined the long-term effects: irreversible joint damage, organ involvement, and even early disability if left untreated. Some patients needed joint replacements before they turned 30. I closed the screen, hands trembling. This wasn't just about comfort anymore. This was my future. And it felt like the people who were supposed to care the most had decided it wasn't worth saving. I didn't cry. Not then. I just lay still in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the house I lived in, but didn't really belong to. Not anymore. I woke up that morning already knowing something was wrong. The fever had crept in overnight, thick and quiet, wrapping around me like a wet blanket. My joints throbbed so violently I could barely move my fingers. My knees felt like they were filled with broken glass. My skin was slick with sweat, yet I shivered uncontrollably as I reached for the bottle of ibuprofen on my nightstand. There was a history test that day, one I couldn't afford to miss. I told myself I could get through it. Just survive until third period, then go home and collapse. That was the plan. By the time I walked into school, the world was tilting. The hallways felt too bright. My backpack, nearly empty, weighed more than I could carry. Each step took effort, each breath, concentration. Zoe noticed immediately. "Nat," she whispered as I slid into my seat beside her in English class. "You look awful. You're sweating." "I'm fine," I murmured. But even I could hear the lie. Mr. Bennett was mid-lecture on Shakespeare's sonnets when the black spots started crowding my vision. My hands shook so badly I couldn't hold my pencil. I blinked, tried to steady my breath, but my body was louder than my will. When the bell rang, I tried to stand. My knees buckled instantly. Zoe caught me before I hit the floor. "That's it," she said, voice firm, her arm already wrapping around my waist. "You're going to the nurse." I didn't argue. I couldn't. She half carried me down the hallway as students stepped aside, some staring, others pretending not to. My body felt distant, like I was watching it from outside myself. My head pounded, my skin burned. I barely registered the fluorescent lights overhead or the soft voice of Nurse Daniels when we finally reached the office. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Let's get her to the cot. Now." Zoe helped me onto the thin mattress as Nurse Daniels took my temperature. 103.9, she said grimly. "Natalie, can you hear me?" "Where does it hurt everywhere?" I managed to whisper. "Joints. Head." "I'm calling an ambulance," she said immediately. "Severe flare. She needs emergency care." I heard her on the phone. Snippets of urgency. "Autoimmune. High fever. Unstable. Needs transport now." Zoe stayed beside me, holding my hand. "Hang in there. Nat," she whispered. "Help's coming. You're gonna be okay." I wanted to believe her, but everything hurt. My chest felt tight. My hands, curled on the blanket, were red and swollen. My legs throbbed with heat. "Where are my parents?" I asked faintly. "Nurse Daniels is calling them," Zoe said. "Your mom didn't answer. She's trying your dad." I closed my eyes. Next came voices I didn't recognize. Paramedics lifting me onto a stretcher, asking questions I couldn't follow. There was a sharp prick in my arm, then the cold rush of an IV. Sirens echoed in the distance as I was wheeled out into the daylight. Zoe's voice floated somewhere near. "I'm calling her grandma. She told someone. And I'll meet her at the hospital." The ride blurred. The ER was chaos. Nurses surrounding me. Monitors beeping. Hands on my arms, chest, and face. "She's in systemic flare," one doctor said. "White counts high. Inflammatory markers through the roof. Start prednisone push." Another ordered. "Broad-spectrum antibiotics now." Rule out secondary infection. Then a new voice. Calm, steady. Natalie, he said, leaning over me. I'm Dr. Singh. We're going to take good care of you, but I need you to stay with us. Okay. I tried to nod. The pain in my neck shot down my spine. Where are her parents? He asked sharply. As if summoned, my mother's voice cut through the room, high-pitched and panicked. Where is she? Where's my daughter? Then she was there, pale, trembling, eyes wide with fear. Oh God, Natalie. My dad appeared beside her, his face drawn, his hands shaking. What happened? Is she going to be okay? Doctor. Singh didn't soften his words. She's in critical care. There are signs of organ involvement. We're working to stabilize her. Will she? My mom's voice cracked. We're doing everything we can, he replied. But I need to know. Why hasn't she started the biologic therapy her rheumatologist prescribed? My parents froze. It was recommended more than 2 weeks ago. Doctor, Singh continued. We need to understand why it hasn't been started. Dad looked down. We were still trying to figure out the finances. Doctor, Singh didn't respond right away. But the weight in the silence said enough. She needs it now, he said finally, and a lot more. As the medications pulled me toward unconsciousness, I heard my mom's voice outside the curtain. It was low, choked with guilt. This is our fault. David, she whispered. We should have done it sooner. We bought that stupid phone. What were we thinking, I know? Dad said, God, I know. Then I let go, sinking into the dark, wondering if they finally saw what this delay had cost me. The first thing I noticed when I came to was the cold, not a chill, but that clinical cold that only exists in hospitals. Sharp, sterile, unmoving. I was in a room with dimmed lights and the soft, constant beep of a heart monitor somewhere to my left. IV tubes snaked from my arm. My throat was dry, my limbs heavy, my joints still aching beneath the medication. Voices drifted in from just beyond the curtain. I recognized Dr. Singh's first, measured, but unmistakably firm. She should have started the biologic therapy weeks ago, he said. According to her chart, it was prescribed over 2 weeks prior to this episode. There was a pause. We were trying to work out the finances. My dad replied. His voice was lower now, no longer defensive, just worn. Our insurance only covered part of it. We thought we had more time. Dr. Singh didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With a condition like Natalie's, he said calmly, time is not a luxury. Delaying treatment can lead to irreversible damage, the kind we're seeing signs of now. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I heard my mother sniff quietly, then her voice, broken, uneven. We didn't think it would get this bad. She was pushing through. We didn't know. You were told. Doctor, Singh answered, still calm, still direct. I understand this is difficult, but I need to be clear. Her current state is a direct result of not receiving timely treatment. A rustle. Someone is shifting in their seat. Then my mother whispered, we bought our younger daughter a phone. $1,000 phone, and told Natalie we didn't have money for her treatment. Silence followed. Not the soft kind. This one was sharp, embarrassed, heavy. I don't know what we were thinking, she said. She looked at me, and I said we had no money. And then I turned around and spent it on a phone Emma didn't even need. God. Her words dissolved into quiet sobs. My father's voice came next, hollow. I see her face every time I close my eyes. The way she looked at us when we said no. We thought it was just another flare. We didn't understand it was this close to breaking her. Doctor, Singh let them sit in that silence, let the gravity of their choices settle into the space. She's stable for now, he said finally. But this was close. Too close. We've begun aggressive treatment, but she's at risk. This won't be a quick recovery. There was a scraping sound. Maybe my dad pulling a chair closer. We'll do whatever it takes now, he said. Whatever she needs. We'll find the money. My mom murmured something I couldn't quite hear, but her voice cracked again. Another apology, maybe. Another fragment of guilt she finally couldn't push down. And me, I lay still. Their words flooded through me, wave after wave. The anger, the disbelief, the part of me that wanted to scream. Now you understand. Now, when I'm hooked up to machines. But there was something else buried beneath all of it. Something quieter, sadder. I wanted their remorse to fix it, but it couldn't. Not the damage in my joints, not the trust that had fractured the moment they decided a camera upgrade was more urgent than my health. Still, I didn't turn away when they walked in a few minutes later, eyes red, faces pale. Mom tried to smile, but it collapsed into a sob when she saw I was awake. Dad whispered my name like it was something fragile. They hovered near the bed, unsure of what to say. I didn't offer anything, because there wasn't anything to say. They'd already spoken their truth, and I'd heard every word. The first 2 days in the hospital passed in fragments, nurses adjusting IVs, muted conversations behind curtains, and the slow, heavy pull of medication dulling everything I felt. But by day 3, the fog started to lift. The fever broke sometime during the night, and when I opened my eyes that morning, the room no longer spun. The pain was still there, deep in my knees, sharp in my wrists, but it no longer drowned me. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I could breathe without bracing for the next wave of pain. When I turned my head, I saw my mom asleep in the chair beside my bed. Her hands were tucked under her chin, her blouse wrinkled, her shoes still on. There were tear tracks dried on her face. Something inside me shifted. She stirred when I adjusted the blanket. Her eyes snapped open and locked on mine, and then they filled again. "Natalie," she whispered, voice cracking as she leaned forward. "You're awake." I nodded slowly. Her hands fluttered at first, unsure, then found mine. "You scared us," she said. "The doctors said." It was close. I didn't answer. Not yet. I didn't know how. A few hours later, my dad returned from the cafeteria, his usual neatness replaced by exhaustion. Shirt untucked, coffee trembling slightly in his hand. When he saw me awake, he let out a breath that seemed to come from his bones. "They've started the biologic therapy," he said quietly. "Doctor, Singh says your body's responding. The inflammation's coming down." I nodded again. Small, careful. "We've made arrangements," he added, "for the full course. It's all covered now." He didn't say how. I didn't ask. What lingered between us wasn't just about money. That afternoon, the door creaked open again, and this time, it was Emma. She hesitated in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she was allowed in. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and her face looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because for the first time in a long while, she wasn't smiling for attention. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," I replied. She stepped forward, clutching something in her hands. When she reached the edge of the bed, she held it out. It was the iPhone, the one that started it all. "I brought this," she said. "I don't want it. I already asked Mom and Dad to return it." I stared at her, unsure of what to say. "There's more," she added quickly. Reaching into her backpack, she pulled out a small envelope. I emptied my savings account, birthday money, babysitting, tutoring. It's not much, but maybe it can help. I didn't reach for it. I just looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see the golden girl who always got everything. I saw a 15-year-old kid trying to make something right. You don't have to do this, I said softly. Yes, I do, she replied, eyes glassy. I didn't understand how bad it was. I just kept talking about my life like everything was normal. But you were hurting, and I didn't see it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch the IV. Remember when we were little, she said, and we'd play make-believe, and you always let me be the princess, even though I knew you wanted to be her, too. I smiled faintly. You were very dramatic for a 5-year-old. She laughed once, then wiped her face. You always took care of me. Nat, now it's my turn. Something in my chest cracked open, not in pain, but in recognition. For the first time in what felt like years, I saw my sister, not just as someone living in my shadow, or casting one, but as someone trying, in her own imperfect way, to reach me. Keep your money, I said gently. That's not what this is about. She shook her head. I want to help. However, I can. And for the first time in a long, long time, I let her. Not with money, not with fixes, but with presence, with understanding. The kind that comes not from guilt, but from growing up. I was discharged 5 days after being admitted, though time had lost most of its meaning by then. What I remembered was the moment Dr. Singh walked in with his quiet nod and said, "You're stable. You're strong enough to go home." The ride back to our house was quiet, not tense, just thoughtful, like we were all holding our breath around something delicate. I watched trees blur past the car window, trying to imagine what home meant now. Would it feel the same? Would I feel the same? But when we pulled into the driveway, the first surprise was waiting for me. A ramp. A newly built wooden structure extended from the front steps down to the sidewalk. Simple but solid. We installed it yesterday, Dad said, following my gaze. Just until stairs aren't such a battle. Inside, more changes. The living room had been rearranged to make space for a hospital-style bed placed in the corner, complete with an adjustable tray and a soft reading lamp. A mini fridge next to it was already stocked with water bottles, juice, and yogurt. My favorite blanket, the one with faded constellations, was folded neatly on the end of the bed. Mom glanced at me nervously. We figured it'd be easier than climbing the stairs for now, but we can move everything back whenever you're ready. I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded, and meant it. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything. But it was something. And in that moment, that mattered. In the kitchen, I noticed other things. The expensive espresso machine was gone from the counter, replaced by our old kettle and a jar of instant coffee. The stand mixer Mom loved, the sleek one with the glass bowl, had disappeared too. In its place, a small hand whisk and a sticky note labeled "Use gently, elbows matter." Later that evening, I overheard a conversation between my parents from the next room. "You sure about selling it?" Mom asked quietly. "She needs this more than I need chrome and leather," Dad replied. It took me a moment to realize what they meant. The car. Dad's vintage convertible. The one he spent 2 years restoring on weekends. Gone. Sold without fanfare. No lecture. No guilt. Just gone. That night, Emma brought in a tray of tea and helped me set up my medications. She'd arranged the pills by color and time, labeled each section of the organizer with a sticky note. Her handwriting was neat but nervous. I double-checked everything, she said, and I added a Netflix queue, documentaries, cooking shows, and one drama that's so bad it's good. I smiled. The kind that grows slowly. Thanks. Em. She shrugged, but her face brightened. You'd do the same for me. Over the next few days, I started noticing more of the quiet adjustments. Dad had picked up a part-time evening job at Home Depot. He didn't say much about it, but I saw the tiredness in his eyes and the new calluses on his hands. Mom had taken a temporary leave from school, rearranging her schedule so she could be home most days. I found lesson plans in her tote bag, scrawled between reminders to refill my prescriptions. And Emma, she surprised me most. She cleaned the kitchen without being asked, learned how to track my medication side effects, even watched YouTube videos on autoimmune nutrition, quoting bits to me as she passed the mashed potatoes one night. These are anti-inflammatory, she said, smiling. I didn't correct her. I just ate them. These weren't grand gestures. There were no sweeping apologies or dramatic speeches, but they didn't need to be. Because it was in the small, unspoken things, the way they held the door a second longer, the way they listened more carefully, the way they stayed present instead of retreating, that I finally felt it. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was being seen, cared for, chosen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. It started with a knock, not the light kind, half-hearted, obligatory, but a solid, careful knock. One that said, "We're here, but we're not coming in unless you say it's okay." I looked up from my book. My room, once the downstairs guest room, was quiet except for the hum of the bedside lamp. Outside the door, I heard my dad clear his throat. "Nat," he said, "do you have a minute?" I hesitated, then called out, "Yeah." The door opened, and both of them stepped in. Mom held a mug of tea. Dad had his hands shoved deep in his pockets, like he didn't trust them not to fidget. They didn't sit right away. Just stood there for a second, looking at me like they weren't sure where to start. "We'd like to talk," Mom said. "Just us. If that's okay." I nodded. Slowly. "Okay." They pulled up the chairs from the hallway and sat side by side. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mom placed the tea on my table, but didn't try to hand it to me. What followed wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished, but it was real. What we did. Dad began. Choosing to delay your treatment. Buying that phone. Trying to justify it to ourselves. There's no excuse for it. Mom's voice trembled. I've been thinking about that moment in the kitchen, when you asked again about the therapy, and I said we didn't have money for you. I replay it in my head constantly. The look on your face. She looked up, her eyes glassy. I wish I could take it back, but I know I can't. I think part of me, she continued, was terrified. Of how serious your condition had become. Of how powerless I felt. It was easier to pour my energy into Emma's routines, her school, her goals, because they were manageable. They didn't scare me the way your illness did. Dad nodded. And I convinced myself that being fair meant treating both of you the same, but it wasn't fair. Not really. Because you weren't getting what you needed. There was no defense, no blame shifting, no guilt tripping, just quiet honesty that landed heavy between us. I swallowed hard. It hurt, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It still does. Mom reached for my hand but stopped halfway, letting her fingers hover. I understand. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, I added. Not all the way. Dad didn't flinch. That's okay. You don't have to. Not now. Maybe not ever. We're not asking for that. We're asking, Mom said gently, for a chance to do better, starting with something concrete. She reached into her tote and pulled out a small booklet, bright orange, stamped with a sunflower on the front. Family therapy, she said. We found a counselor who specializes in chronic illness and family dynamics. Her name is Dr. Winters. She's seen a lot of families like ours. I looked at the booklet, then back at them. We already had our intake session, Dad added. She said, we have some work to do, and we agree. I paused. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still wanted to hold on to the anger. It had become a kind of armor. But there was another part, deeper and quieter, that wanted what they were offering. Not perfection, not a reset button, just effort. Okay, I said softly. I'll go. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. But the feeling was different. Not cold, not hollow, just open. A small crack in the wall I'd built. Not enough to let everything in, but maybe, just maybe, enough to let something begin. I returned to school on a Thursday. Not full-time, just 3 classes to start: English, history, and art. The rest I would make up with independent study and modified assignments. The administration had been more understanding than I expected. Ms. Ramirez worked with my doctors, my parents, and even the district to build a plan that didn't just check boxes. It actually worked for me. There was a second set of textbooks waiting for me in the front office, so I wouldn't have to carry anything between home and school. I was allowed to use the elevator. I had extra time on essays, and a permanent seat near the door in every classroom so I could stretch my legs or step out if the pain got too much. It didn't feel like special treatment. It felt like someone finally recognized what I was carrying. Zoe met me at the front entrance that first day back, a thermos of hot cocoa in one hand and a stack of printouts in the other. You missed exactly nothing in history, she said, looping her arm through mine. Except for Mr. Logan accidentally playing a World War I documentary with German subtitles. He swore it was an immersive experience. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. You're my favorite immersive experience, I told her. Obviously. She grinned. Also, I threatened anyone who stared at your wheelchair. Just so we're clear. True to her word, Zoe stayed close all morning, walking beside me at my pace, gently redirecting anyone who reached for my chair without asking, and filling the spaces between classes with enough nonsense to drown out the nerves. She didn't hover. She anchored. At lunch, we sat at the end of a long table near the windows. The light was soft, filtered through the trees, and for once, I didn't feel like hiding. Zoe leaned in casually. So, Trevor asked if he could sit with us. I blinked. Trevor Mitchell. She nodded. Too innocent. I told him he had to submit a formal application and at least 3 references. Zoe. Kidding, she said, sipping her drink. But not really. That boy better earn his spot. I smiled, and this time it reached all the way to my chest. By the end of the week, something surprising had happened. I felt like me again. Not just the girl with the diagnosis, not just the medical file or the shadow in the background. I was Natalie Carter, student, friend, human being, at home. Change kept unfolding in quiet ways. Emma had started reading medical blogs, not just summaries, but in-depth research about autoimmune disorders. She printed out articles and highlighted sections. One afternoon, she appeared in my doorway holding a flyer. Did you know there's a teen support group for chronic illness at the community center, she asked. They meet on Thursdays. I thought, maybe you'd want to check it out. I raised an eyebrow. You want to go with me to a group about joint pain and medication side effects? She shrugged. I figured if you had to sit through my violin recitals for years, I could handle this. I laughed. You always played too fast. You always clapped too loudly. We were quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Yeah, I'd like that. I don't want to go alone." She gave me a small, genuine smile. "You won't have to." And somehow, that meant more than anything she could have printed or underlined. Those weeks were still hard. My body didn't bounce back just because my mind was clearer. I still had flares, still had bad nights, but they weren't empty anymore. They weren't quiet in that isolating way they used to be. Now, when I missed school, Zoe dropped off notes and brought hot drinks. Emma left sticky notes on my mirror. "You're stronger than your worst day." My parents didn't hover, but they didn't retreat either. They stayed present, attentive, accountable. For the first time since the diagnosis, I didn't feel like I was walking through this alone. And in the spaces between pain and progress, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time: belonging. 3 months after the hospital, I sat across from Dr. Haynes as he flipped through my latest test results. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and peppermint tea. His brow furrowed in concentration, then lifted, just slightly. "Your inflammation markers are the lowest they've been since you were diagnosed," he said, setting the folder down. "The biologics are doing exactly what they should. You're not in remission yet, Natalie, but you're close, very close." I didn't say anything right away, just let the weight of those words settle in. Close. After 3 years of decline, 3 months of fighting, and a lifetime's worth of disappointment, I was finally walking towards something other than survival. Mom squeezed my hand beside me, and I glanced at her. She didn't cry, not this time, but her eyes said enough. Hope no longer felt fragile in our house. It felt like something we were learning to trust again. That afternoon, I posted a photo to my private Instagram account, a picture of my wrist with the medical bracelet still faintly marked into the skin, next to my medication organizer and a messy scribble that read "Almost there." Underneath, I wrote a caption that said, "Autoimmune disease isn't a straight line. It's a loop, a spiral, a tug of war with your own body. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not losing." The comments came in slowly, then faster. Teens from across the country, strangers who had felt the same kind of pain, the same kind of silence. One girl wrote, "I didn't think anyone else felt like this. Thank you for saying it out loud." So I kept going. Each week, I shared pieces of my story, some days hopeful, some days angry, some days just honest. And in return, I found a community I never knew I needed, people who didn't flinch at the word chronic, who didn't need me to fake being okay, who understood that healing wasn't always visible. Meanwhile, things at home continued to change, but this time, they stuck. We went to therapy together every other Thursday. Dr. Winters helped us unpack old patterns, some we didn't even know we'd built. She talked about how invisible illness can make grief linger in households, how fear becomes avoidance, how shame can wear the face of pride. It was hard, sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also the first time we'd ever said the truth to each other without raising our voices. And Emma became a force of her own. One evening after dinner, she stood up, cleared her throat, and said she needed our help. We followed her into the living room, where she'd set up a poster board, some flyers, and a donation jar shaped like a mason jar full of glitter. "I'm launching a fundraiser," she announced. "It's called Dollars for Diagnosis. All proceeds go to autoimmune disease research for teens. Bake sales, car washes, raffle baskets, everything we can manage." We stared at her. "You're serious?" Dad asked. "Dead serious," Emma said. "Nobody should have to wait until their sister collapses to understand what's happening in her body." And just like that, we all signed up. The fundraiser raised over $3,000 in 6 weeks. Emma stood on stage at the community center during the final event, holding a check nearly half her size, and handed it to a representative from the Autoimmune Research Foundation. Cameras flashed, people clapped, but what I'll remember most is the way she looked at me from across the room. Proud, steady, sure. At home, we built new rhythms, game nights with board games that didn't require fine motor skills, grocery lists that factored in anti-inflammatory foods, vacation plans that included proximity to urgent care clinics and pharmacy hours. We didn't treat those adjustments like inconveniences anymore. They were part of how we loved each other. And for once, love didn't mean pretending everything was fine. It meant adapting. It meant showing up. It meant staying. That fall, I started working on a personal essay for college applications. The prompt asked, "What challenge has shaped who you are?" I didn't have to think long. 3 years ago, I was a girl who thought strength meant silence. Today, I know better. Healing didn't just happen in my body, it happened in my family, and in that messy, slow, imperfect process, we became something I never thought we'd be again: whole. 1 year after the hospital, our family Thanksgiving looked nothing like the one from the year before. The turkey wasn't perfect. Dad overcooked it slightly. Mom's cranberry sauce was a little too tart. Emma dropped a bowl of mashed potatoes on the floor during cleanup and declared it a symbolic offering to the gods of growth and chaos. And somehow, it was exactly right. Our table was full, not just with food, but with laughter, with pauses that didn't feel heavy anymore, and with voices that remembered how to speak gently. Grandma June brought her famous pecan pie and sat next to Zoe, who had practically become a member of the family by then. We didn't talk about the hospital that day, but we didn't avoid it either. It lived quietly in the background, acknowledged, no longer feared. Earlier that week, I had submitted my college application. My personal statement was titled, "The Space Between Flares." It wasn't a sob story. It wasn't a plea. It was a map, a reflection of the girl I had been, the one who'd vanished into pain and silence, and the girl I had become, who learned how to speak, how to ask, how to trust again. I applied to several universities, but my heart was set on a small liberal arts college in Oregon, with a strong literature program and one of the best disability support offices in the state. For the first time, college didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt real, possible, mine. I still had flares, still had days when the stairs felt like mountains, when my fingers ached too much to write, when my body reminded me, gently or not, that this journey wasn't linear. But I no longer faced those days alone. My parents had grown in ways I didn't think possible. They still made mistakes, everyone does. But they listened now. They showed up. They asked before assuming. They made space instead of filling it with guilt or panic. They weren't perfect, and I didn't need them to be. Emma remained my fiercest ally. She volunteered as a youth mentor at the community center's chronic illness group. She asked questions, took notes at doctor's visits, and never again let her ambition come at the cost of her empathy. Forgiveness wasn't a moment. It was a process. Some days it was easier than others. Some nights I still heard echoes of what had been said, or left unsaid. But over time, the volume faded, and what remained was something quieter, stronger, enduring. Love, yes, but the kind you choose to rebuild, even when the foundation cracks. Now, as I step into the next chapter, I carry more than just medical records or college essays. I carry resilience. I carry clarity. I carry the truth that pain doesn't disqualify you from joy. And being seen, truly seen, is worth every awkward, halting step it takes to get there. This is not the ending, it's the beginning. I nearly lost everything: my health, my hope, and my place in my own family. But today, I'm stepping into a future I helped rebuild. One choice, one boundary, one conversation at a time. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm becoming. If my story spoke to something in you, share it. Leave a comment. Hit that like button. And subscribe to hear more true stories of healing, growth, and second chances. You never know. Your story might be the next one that needs to be told.